Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. Alright, so yesterday we went through and talked about the Hamilton Burr fiasco, which to me is one of the craziest stories in U.S. history. Just it's a little out there. It's on a limb. Are they ever going to ask you a question on the final exam about it? Maybe. Probably not. But I think it's worth mentioning because it's an absolutely fantastic story. Stuff we're going to talk about today, however, is much more mainstream, down the center, very important in American history, pivotal in the shaping of not only the federal government, but the direction of America with Thomas Jefferson now as a president. Now, keep in mind, Thomas Jefferson, he had a problem with King George, all right? Declaration of Independence, all this stuff. He absolutely couldn't stand the authority with King George in charge, all right? So then, fought an entire war, all right? Then, the Articles of Confederation, they're garbage, all right? So, what's he do? He shows up, helps get rid of the Articles of Confederation by creating a Constitution, all right? Had a problem with the Articles of Confederation, hated that authority, created a new Constitution. Then becomes the Secretary of State, basically like the second most powerful man in the country behind the president, at least it is today, that position. Couldn't stand, all right, the Federalist, which he was originally a part of, and then he's going to back off. He's actually going to quit because he couldn't stand Alexander Hamilton. Now, it'd be easy to say he couldn't stand George Washington being a Federalist, but everybody loved George Washington. Nobody's going to have a problem with him. But he hated the direction that the federal government was going, so he quits as the Secretary of State. He goes, creates his own political party, the Democratic Republicans or the Jeffersonian Republicans, whatever you want to call them. And then he's going to come back. He comes back and runs for president. He's going to lose in 1796, all right, to John Adams, the second president of the United States, so he loses. Aggressively fights against John Adams with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, not liking that leadership as well. Now, it's 1800. Thomas Jefferson, who has been super critical of basically every leader that's ever been in charge of him his entire life, is now going to be in charge of the government. How is this going to work out for somebody who has always thought he could do it better? Spoiler alert, when Thomas Jefferson dies, much later on after this, he's super famous for all the stuff he's done in his life. Interesting enough, on his tombstone, and it's a substantial tombstone, he has all his accomplishments listed of all the things he accomplished in his life. You know what he specifically said, do not put on my tombstone? Was that time that he was the president of the United States. Yeah, it's real easy to be critical of other people in charge until it's you. When you get put in charge, there's nobody else to blame. All these decisions that have to be made, you actually have to make them, and you can't just see how it turns out, and if it turns out bad, be critical of it because you made the decisions. So it's very interesting, and I think this is a prime example of how people who are real critical of other people sometimes overestimate their ability to do it well themselves. Now, with that being said, he was not a horrific president, all right? We're going to get through and tell the story here. There's, give and take on everything. But Thomas Jefferson did not enjoy being the president. Thomas Jefferson also suffered from migraines, and stress would bring on migraines, and he suffered through like severe migraines the entire time he was president. So have a little sympathy for him there. But let's get through and start talking today about Thomas Jefferson and some of the stuff that he did when he was the president, because it is all really interesting. And again, I don't need to give you any more precursors than that. All right, so Thomas Jefferson's administration. So Thomas Jefferson supports this. He's a strict constructionist coming in. Remember that. The idea that you can only do what the federal government says you can do, the Constitution. You can't just go do whatever you want whenever. So he comes in, very strict interpretation of the Constitution. That's his belief on day one. All right. He thinks that the United States government should be as small as possible. So what he does is he downsizes a lot of the national government immediately and gets rid of all the stuff that he thinks isn't necessary. This is good. All right. Okay. This is kind of what he, all right. And then he stops taxing the American people. So to start out with, the American people love him, like, yay, we don't have to pay taxes. However, the federal government is going to need money in order to make money. All right. So what they end up having to do is he has a very unique way of making money. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But it is not taxing. So he makes the government small, no taxing. And he's like, hey, this being a president thing is easy. However, there's this dude named John Marshall. All right. Let me move it down here. This dude, we haven't mentioned him yet, but he is crazy important in American history. All right. He's been behind the scenes of a lot of things that we have talked about, some of these stories, but we haven't actually mentioned his name. So John Marshall, all right, super important here. There's also a John Marshall in our school district that is over technology at the county level. So every time I get an email from John Marshall, I'm like, uh-oh. But then I realized that John Marshall, the Supreme Court Justice, would have been about, almost 300 years old now. So probably not an email from him. But, so John Marshall is this guy. He's a Supreme Court Justice. What a Supreme Court Justice is. This is a guy that is a judge on the Supreme Court. One of the branches of government. Now, Supreme Court Justices, if you remember from civics, they are appointed for life. All right? So all the guys that are on the Supreme Court are the original ones there, because the Supreme Court at this point is about 12 years old. All right. So everybody that was appointed there for life, they're still there. So who got to appoint every single person on that Supreme Court? George Washington. All right. Now, George Washington was a Federalist. George Washington believed in a large government. All right. That meaning that the government should be big enough to support the people and do good things for the people. Well, Thomas Jefferson wants a small government. So Thomas Jefferson and the beliefs of the Federalists are completely opposite. However, all the Supreme Court justices, they were all put there by Federalists. So all the Supreme Court justices are going to view things different than Thomas Jefferson. The heads of the Supreme Court, all right, is this guy right here, John Marshall. So John Marshall is going to butt heads up one side and down the other with Thomas Jefferson from the beginning. The reason that is because he's fundamentally going to believe that the federal government should be stronger so it can do more stuff. Thomas Jefferson wants to make the federal government smaller. So when these cases go to the Supreme Court, the Marshall Court, as it's called, of this guy right here, every single time he makes a ruling, the ruling is going to increase the power of the federal government. Something that Thomas Jefferson absolutely can't stand. And since it's a separate branch of government, Thomas Jefferson can't do anything about it. So here's some of the famous ones. Hopefully y'all talk about some of these in civics. Gibbons versus Ogden, Dartmouth versus Woodard, and then the famous one, Marbury v. Madison, that we're going to talk about here in detail. So he supports federal supremacy, meaning that he thinks the federal government is over the states when there's a dispute. He says the power to regulate, like all others vested in Congress, acknowledges no limitations other than are prescribed in the Constitution. This is a very loose constructionist idea. He is saying that the government doesn't acknowledge any limitations unless it clearly says you can't do it. So he's like, the only thing that we don't do is what it says we can't. Otherwise, we're good to go. That's loose constructionist thinking. That's Alexander Hamilton thinking, not Jefferson thinking. All right. So that's going to be an issue. This next quote here says, supporting economic development. So this is a contract, the obligation of which cannot be impaired without violating the Constitution. There's talking about growth of like the markets and manufacturing in the United States. Thomas Jefferson wants to be all agriculture. He is a small agriculture, family first. We don't need to progress in society. We're good where we are. Let's just keep the basics. While a lot of the Federalists wanted this idea of growth. And his ruling on this court case is basically like the government does not have a right to stop people from growing and being bigger. All right. So it's a very Federalist mentality, and then supports judicial power. All right. So let me talk about this court case here, Marbury v. Madison. Now, in civics, you probably talked about it ad nauseum. Hopefully you did. And hopefully this would be great to go ahead and start with it burned into your brain that Marbury v. Madison means judicial review. It means that the Supreme Court has the authority to be the referee, that the Supreme Court is the one that can call bull crap on laws that violate the Constitution. Now, I want to tell you the story about Marbury v. Madison, and it's pretty cool. So, what happens is the president has the ability to appoint federal judges, and they're there for a certain amount of time. All right. So when the president says something, boom, they're there, and they can't be fired until their time's up, or they break the law or something like that. All right. So when John Adams realizes he has lost this election in 1800, he still gets to be the president for like 3 months until they swear in Thomas Jefferson. So that time period from the time you lose an election to the time that you're actually, removed from office, I guess, you're called a lame duck president because, you can't really do anything. Well, that's just a term because you can do the same amount that you could before because you're still the president. So what he's going to do, John Adams, is going to appoint a whole bunch of Federalist judges before Thomas Jefferson can take over. That way, Thomas Jefferson has to deal with all these Federalist federal judges across the country. So what he does is he writes down everybody's name. Right? He's like, everybody who he wants to be a judge, and has individual pieces of paper already signed, officially sealed, like, boom, you get to be a judge. Right? And they're going to be sent out to these people around the country. However, if you know that you've been chosen to be a judge, you don't actually get to be a judge until you have that piece of paper in your hand. So there's like a week left in his time in office, and John Adams sends out his Secretary of State to run across the country and hand out these pieces of paper. All right. He only gets to hand out about half of them before the week is up. So the first thing, when Thomas Jefferson takes over, the first thing that Thomas Jefferson's supposed to do is have his new Secretary of State hand out the remaining pieces of paper that let these people be judges. All right. So Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State is a guy named James Madison. James Madison will also be a president. All right. James Madison is also the guy that helped Thomas Jefferson write the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. So James Madison and Thomas Jefferson are kind of bros. So it's supposed to be James Madison's responsibility to go hand out the rest of these judgeships that were created by Adams. Now, here's where it gets weird. Thomas Jefferson tells Madison, you don't have to do it. If they haven't already got their pieces of paper, they're not actually a judge. Tear them up. I'm going to appoint other people that I like to those positions. All right. The next guy that was supposed to get his piece of paper is a guy named Marbury. Marbury is furious. All right. He is like, that is some bull crap. I want my piece of paper. I'm a judge. John Adams already made me the judge. I just need my piece of paper. You have to give it to me. And Thomas Jefferson's like, I don't think I do. I'm pretty sure I can just tear that up and make it for somebody else, and that's going to be fine. So Marbury, all right, the guy that's supposed to be the judge, sues Madison, James Madison, the guy, the Secretary of State, who's supposed to give it to him for not giving him the piece of paper. This goes all the way to the Supreme Court. So the question here is, does Marbury get to be a judge or not? So John Marshall, the head of the Supreme Court, makes a really shocking decision. I say shocking when you look at it historically, because the big outcome of this has nothing to do with whether or not Marbury gets to be a judge or not. The actual outcome is that John Marshall actually says, no, Marbury, you don't get to be the judge. The president says it, then no, you don't get to be a judge. And so you would think that this would be a huge win for Thomas Jefferson, because Thomas Jefferson doesn't have to make Marbury a judge. But then John Marshall says some other stuff, and Thomas Jefferson's like, you gotta be kidding me. So what, after they come out and say, Marbury, you're not going to be the judge, and while we have y'all here, there's a new rule. From now on, the Supreme Court is the referee. We now have judicial review. Anytime a law gets passed, if it violates the Constitution, like the Alien and Sedition Acts did, all right, it is going to be us, the Supreme Court, who throws it out. That we're now the referee. Not the states in that weird Alien and Sedition Acts thing, or the Virginia and Kentucky thing. That's not what does it. It's going to be our say-so. Now, Even though Thomas Jefferson won this court case with Marbury v. Madison, the fact that the Supreme Court has judicial review and the Supreme Court is filled with people who don't necessarily like Thomas Jefferson is instrumental in the future of the country and with Thomas Jefferson's time in office, because now the Supreme Court is a whole lot more powerful and they have the ability to regulate what laws are allowed and which ones aren't based on the Constitution. But it has worked very well today. So the question here is, why does Chief Justice John Marshall, who was appointed by George Washington, dislike Jefferson so much? And why doesn't Jefferson fire him? So we talk. Hopefully you remember from civics that, like, why doesn't Jefferson fire a Supreme Court justice? You can't. All right, you can't fire a Supreme Court justice. They're there for life. All right, there's nothing you can do about that. Once they're there, it's a huge ordeal when somebody gets appointed to the Supreme Court. They're there for life. The reason for that is they should never have to worry about re-election or anything like that. They just need to follow the Constitution, and they need to be not political. They just need to look at the Constitution, and that's it. That is supposed to be their only job. I do believe if you get appointed as a Supreme Court justice and you serve like one day and you quit, you still get paid your full salary for the rest of your life. Now, by the time you get to that level, everybody loves the fact that they're a Supreme Court justice. It's kind of the peak of being a judge, so people don't just quit. But they do that so that people don't get too old and like, I don't want to quit because how am I going to make my payments? They're like, no, you can quit. Absolutely. Like, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. We'll keep paying you, right? Quit and we'll replace you with somebody else. So the Supreme Court is unique in the United States with they're appointed for life. But explain why Jefferson does not get along with John Marshall, and we talked about that in detail. All right. This is really cool. The Louisiana Purchase. So, what do I got here? All right, let me show you a map, because when I try to explain it here, it's just going to get weird. Collapse side panel. All right. This here's a map of America. So at the time period that we are currently talking about, don't want to do that. I'm all over the place right here. This is America. All right. We've actually moved out here a little bit to Ohio and some stuff out here. But the real problem when you move to the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, and these are Appalachian Mountains right here, is trying to get supplies out there. It is really difficult. Now, what we have learned is that there is a river, all right, that runs in the center of America, all right, and it's called the Mississippi River. Here, look, I'll go satellite view on it. Boop. Go satellite. All right. Zoom in. Zoom in. Massive river. Runs down the center of the United States. All right. I can see my face up here not catching up. I'm going to move my face over because apparently using too much bandwidth, and I'll move myself back when I'm done talking. All right. So, the Mississippi River runs down the center of America. But here's the problem. I'll go back to map here. All right. Here's the problem. That we don't own this area. We being America do not own this area right here. All right. It is owned by Spain. Now, the entrance to the Mississippi River is in New Orleans, all right, which is down here in a state today called Louisiana, all right, and New Orleans. So the only way in and out of the Mississippi River, right here, all right, is through New Orleans. So whoever owns New Orleans basically can control the entire center of the country, because this river runs all the way down the center. If you live out here on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, so the Appalachian Mountains are right here, right? I'll draw a little line. Appalachian Mountains are right here, and the Mississippi River is right here. If you live here in the middle, you have to rely on the Mississippi River to get supplies. But Spain owns the Mississippi River. So what do we have to do? All right. We need to be able to use the Mississippi River without Spain bothering us. So here's what we do. We sign a treaty with Spain called Pinkneys Treaty. Pinkneys Treaty is basically a one lump sum payment that we give to Spain, so they will let us go up and down the Mississippi River all that we want, and everything is good. All right. So we signed Pinkneys Treaty, and we're like, fine, we'll just go with that. Well, what ends up happening is Spain gets attacked by France. France has Napoleon Bonaparte now. France is extremely powerful, and Napoleon Bonaparte defeats Spain and now takes all of Spain's territories. Guess who now owns New Orleans and therefore the entire Mississippi River? France. Napoleon. So we're like, oh my gosh. So now France doesn't acknowledge Pinkneys Treaty where we had paid them. All right. So see if I can move my face back over here, if it'll catch up now. So what ends up happening, all right, is Thomas Jefferson is going to send people over to talk to Napoleon to figure out how we're going to deal with this. The way it's going to work is Thomas Jefferson doesn't want to keep renting access to the Mississippi River. It's so important to us, all right? So he's going to send his Secretary of State, James Madison, over to talk to Napoleon and try to get him to sell us New Orleans so that we can officially own the city. City is incredibly important in American history, all right? Because it's how you get in and out of the Mississippi River, which is like the lifeline of the center of the country. So he's like, all right, James Madison, here's what you get to do. Here is $10 million. Try to buy that city for less than $10 million if you can. But do not go over $10 million. We do not have more than $10 million. So he's going to send James Madison over to France in order to try to buy this one little city for $10 million. You with me so far? Because the story gets progressively cooler. All right. So this kind of talks about Pinkneys Treaty. We wanted to secure this land. We needed access to the Mississippi River. So we came to an agreement with Spain called Pinkneys Treaty. But once Spain gets taken over by France and Napoleon's in charge, he doesn't acknowledge Pinkneys Treaty. So now we're going to have to go try to buy it. So Pinkneys Treaty allowed us to use the Mississippi without being bothered. What happened that nullified or got rid of Pinkneys Treaty? So go through and answer that in 2 complete sentences. Pause me if you need. So here's what ends up happening. Again, so this is the map, all right, of what the United States is, and it's really hard. So this little line right here, that's the Mississippi River, all right. It is. You can tell it's hard to get supplies out there because it's just kind of inconsistent. Here's another picture. Is a better map. So this is the Mississippi River here in the center. You can see how important it is. I mean, all of these cities basically are going to rely almost exclusively on supplies from the Mississippi River. This is why most of these don't exist at the time. We have to have access down here to New Orleans. All right. So he sends them over. Sends James Madison over to speak to Napoleon. Now, it's interesting. The last time we tried to talk to Napoleon, they wanted us to pay all this tribute and everything. However, now Napoleon's in the middle of a war. He is fighting England. He's fighting, shocker. He's fighting Spain. He's fighting everybody. He needs money. All right. So he knows America's coming over here, and he has already thought about maybe make some money, sell this, like maybe. All right. So he's going to be more than happy to talk to us this time, all right, because we're here to buy stuff from him, not, negotiate a treaty or anything like that. So he's not going to be a jerk. He's going to sit down with us. I don't know if it's actually Napoleon himself or his people, but for my story, I want to imagine Napoleon sits down with James Madison. And James Madison's like, okay, we want to buy this. We want to buy New Orleans. And Napoleon's like, $15 million. Like further, like $15 million. And James Madison's like, no. We'll give you $3 million. Right? Like trying to play hardball negotiate. And Napoleon's like, 15. James Madison's like, sir, okay. I said, okay. $6 million. That's more than fair. That's more than market value. We'll give you $6 million for that city. Napoleon's like, $15 million. James Madison's like, 10, final offer, $10 million, got ourselves a deal. Napoleon looks at him and says, done told you, 15 million. And James Madison's like, okay, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't have 15 million. Like, I'm not authorized to spend $15 million. It's one city. Like, I'm not paying more than $10 million for one city. And Napoleon's like, no. I don't think you understand what's happening here. You want to buy New Orleans, the entrance into the Mississippi River. Well, the moment you buy that, all the other land that I own over there, you're not going to give me access to it, since the only way to get there is the Mississippi River and New Orleans. So I'm not going to just sell you New Orleans. I am going to sell you New Orleans plus the land that I own over there. And that's what I'm selling you for $15 million. And Madison's like, sir, I am just trying to buy one city. That's a bunch of other land that we don't want. There's no way it's worth like anything close to that. And Napoleon's like, bring in the map. And Napoleon comes out and rolls out the map and shows James Madison what land he's selling him for $15 million. James Madison looks at the map and goes, deal, $15 million. We're good with that. Okay. You can take cash or check. And immediately buys it from him. All right. Comes back to America. Thomas Jefferson's like, okay, how'd it go? And he's like, we got it. And he's like, great. How much did you spend? And James Madison's like, $15 million. And Thomas Jefferson's like, what? I told you can't do that. That's ridiculous. And he goes, hold on. All right. And rolls out the same map Napoleon showed him and said, this is what we just bought for $15 million. And Thomas Jefferson looks at it and says, good job. Like, that's awesome. Because keep in mind, America exists right here. Oh, I used a blue one. Let's use a pink one here. Right in here. This is where America exists. For $15 million, this is what we bought. So we bought New Orleans, yes. And this is the Mississippi River. We bought all of this, which literally doubles the size of the United States. All right. All of a sudden, the ability to expand west, more agriculture and all this other stuff, this is all completely possible. There's nobody standing in our way. Like, we own all this. And Thomas Jefferson's like, yeah, this is a high five. Like, it's something like pennies an acre. It's an absolutely astounding good buy for America. All right. So James Madison doesn't get fired for overspending because of what he bought. Now, here's what's really interesting. Thomas Jefferson, this strict constructionist. Does the Constitution say the president has the ability to buy land and double the size of the United States? Absolutely not. All right. It doesn't say you can't do it. All right. So Thomas Jefferson does it since it doesn't say he can't do it, which makes Thomas Jefferson a loose constructionist. So when Thomas Jefferson becomes president, who's super critical of everybody else, completely starts doing the opposite of what he has claimed he stands for, but it's because it's what's best for America. All right. So not only have you doubled the size of the United States, you got to double the size of the government in order to support this whole new venture out here. Thomas Jefferson, who wanted a small government after the Louisiana Purchase, then doubles the size of the United States government. So the man who came in that wanted to be a strict constructionist and a small government comes in, does a loose constructionist stuff, and increased the government size percentage-wise more than any other president we've ever had in American history. So doing the complete opposite of what he says, but because it's for the best, but people start calling him a hypocrite and stuff, you know. But for the most part, people are happy about this. Now, once the Louisiana Purchase happens, you got to go explore it. So he hires these two dudes named Lewis and Clark, all right? And they're going to go with a small group and some interpreters. The most famous one is the wife of their interpreter, who is a Native American. The wife is a woman named Sacagawea. Sacagawea is absolutely pivotal here as one of the most famous women in American history. Is a native that goes with Lewis and Clark and helps them navigate all the way across, because nobody's ever really been out here. Makes you wonder how they had maps of it in the first place. But So they want to see how you can get to the Pacific Ocean across this land. And this red line is the map that Lewis and Clark are going to take all the way over to the Pacific Ocean, and they make it back. This actually is the Oregon Trail itself, which is a really cool game if you've ever played it. But the Oregon Trail, people could take this and go start over in life. But it is mapped out because this is where Lewis and Clark walked across to explore the Louisiana Purchase and make sure there wasn't like a massive lake here in the middle or something crazy. So yeah, so they go out, they map it, they come back. I always think this is weird. So when they show back up, they're like, "Hey, Thomas Jefferson, we got you a gift." You know what gift they got him? They got Thomas Jefferson 2 black bear cubs. Like, that's cool. I mean, but the fact that those exist in Virginia. Why get him a present of something he can get in his backyard because black bears exist anyway? So I always thought that was odd. That was their gift. But so the Louisiana Purchase, he's doing pretty well right now. People are pretty happy with Thomas Jefferson, and we're going to talk about here why they don't like him. So number 22, why did Napoleon sell us Louisiana Purchase? But a few years before this, he refused to even speak to us during the XYZ affair unless we paid him a tribute. So we have talked about that. So pause this, go and answer that in complete sentences. All right. So Thomas Jefferson's administration. So Thomas Jefferson, remember how he wasn't taxing people? Well, here's how he makes money. All that land that he just got in the Louisiana Purchase, he starts selling it to people, all right? There's also a lot of Indian land that we didn't buy that we just took, like our land. Pay us for it. So he sells land to people, which again, loose constructionist, doesn't say you can do that in the Constitution, but he basically, there's a land he got for free, because basically when you break down the Louisiana Purchase, it's next to nothing. And then there's also land in like Ohio that we just took, Indian lands. He just sells that to people, and that's how the government makes income instead of taxing people, is by selling land that he just takes. And that's part of the Land Act of 1800. Jefferson reelected in 1804, pretty convincingly. He's like, hooray. Oh man, and then it gets dumb. He ruins every good bit of will he has with one of the dumbest decisions by a president. England and France go to war again. They both start impressing our seamen, all right, violating our ship's neutrality. You know what his response is to that? Fine. If y'all want to be dumb, we're just not going to trade with anybody. And we put an embargo, which means like refusing to trade or not allowing people to trade, on ourselves. This is how America survives, is we trade with other people. And he's like, fine, they want to be mean to us, we won't trade with them. And it doesn't hardly hurt England and France at all. They can just buy from other people, but we're not allowed to trade, and it completely collapses our society. And it's basically like, what are you thinking, Jefferson? That's not hurting them, it's hurting us. And man, the embargo of 1807, where he just refuses to trade with anybody, just destroys his any good feelings people had towards him at this point. So it was a really bad idea. So the embargo turned out to not be as effective as Jefferson had hoped, and it hurt the American economy far more than it did the French or the British. For the act, most part, people hated this act. They, all these catchphrases, all these negative stuff about it. The act also created drastically increased smuggling and increased unemployment. Like, it's just horrifically bad. So this picture right here, super famous at the time for the Embargo Act, and it doesn't really seem like it makes any sense. So I wanted to, in case you ever see it on an exam, I wanted to go through and talk about this. So this guy's running away with a barrel and is getting attacked by a turtle. And this guy's like, cuss word, how he nicks him. So basically, embargo is like, oh, this cursed Ogambe. That's embargo backwards. Alien and Sedition Acts, people were still a little concerned about talking trash about the government. Neutral countries are required by the order or of council to have licenses to trade, which the turtle was here standing on. And this guy has a barrel of sugar. Yeah, some of these cartoons from back in the day, even if they were popular at the time, not super easy to understand present day. 23, how did the embargo of 1807 make Jefferson one of the most hated men in America right at the end of his career? Because he's not going to run for a third term. He couldn't have won anyway. He's very unpopular, but basically gets like run out of office. Like people, all they remember is this embargo of 1807, which he quickly has to reverse and realize it was a bad idea. But absolutely just destroyed the economy because he didn't know how to deal with England and France. So that's as far as we're going to get today. If you guys will want to pause me, write 2 sentences on that, we will be done with this part for today. See you guys tomorrow.